Okay, so the practice that I want to teach today has to do with co-creating your own sacred space. And I call it Angels of the Four Corners. And the way this practice developed was very interesting. So I was staying on a theosophical campus, and every morning there was a meditation for the workers. So I would join. And as I was doing the meditation in a very large rectangular room with high ceilings, I became aware that in each of the corners of that room, there was an angel, and the angels were talking to me, telling me things about the community that used that space as a meditation hall. And over the course of several days, each time I went to the meditation, I learned more about the angels and about what they did. And it became clear to me that this combination of angels is present in a lot of sacred places. It seems like a very natural thing for them to show up, whether they're actually called or not. And the four angels in question have to do with power, beauty, love, and truth. So the idea somehow is that any sacred work or any kind of meditation or even certain kinds of performances that have a spiritual or a religious significance can call this grid of angels into being. So that, as I mentioned, was about 15 years ago. And since then, in my classes, I've been working on developing my understanding of this practice and the ways of working with these angels. And so the program that I want to share with you will actually lead you through the steps. So I'll be giving you an introduction to each stage of the practice, and then we'll actually do it. The music will come at the end of the practice, and then I'll have a few slides more just to point out a few things that you can do with it at home. As far as I know, there is no danger at all in doing this practice. I've had many, many students and some groups participate in it, and they found that it was very uplifting and also, especially when we use the music for the meditation, it's very conducive to the experience of unity consciousness. So there was just one more thing I wanted to add. Let me think for a moment. So these angels may already be present in the room in which you're working because spiritual work has been going on there for a while. Or in the process of our doing the practice, this angel grid will become a factor or a presence in the room for other people to draw upon or possibly be aware of. There's never any interference from the angels. What they do is they try to support a consciousness space in which there's a perfect balance of power, beauty, love, and truth. So the basic orientation of the practice is there's a physical space, And then there's an inner space. And you can do this practice in either or both, meaning you can do it with your eyes closed and your attention focused inward. And it doesn't matter what space you're in your own mental space, and you can set up this angel grid within that mental space. Or if you're in a physical space where it's appropriate to set up that grid, you can focus on the orientation that you have in that room and the four corners of that room. And if the room is well aligned to the east, which is the most important direction for orienting yourself in the practice, then you can also orient your inner space in that direction. And then there's an inner and an outer relationship between the consciousness room in yourself and the physical space. So the ideal for the room, if you're doing an internally imagined space, is that it should be a square room with high ceilings and one wall representing the east. And if you're using a physical altar, you can use images, crystals, or gemstones to represent the angels. I'll say something about that later because that's a more advanced stage of this practice. But you can also use a bedroom or meditation room or office and place those objects representing the angels in the four corners of the room. We won't be doing that this time. We'll just be using the physical space and our internal space. Now, the orientation with respect to the room requires that you think about where the east is. I did this when I did this in Narden a little over a year ago. There was quite a discussion about whether the grid was the same in both the northern and the southern hemisphere. And it took a while to figure out what the problem was. People were confusing the seasons somehow with the directions. So east is always east because that's the direction that the sun rises in. The sun doesn't rise in the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere as it does in the northern hemisphere. At noon, or the highest point of the sun, it will change, but that has no relevance for this practice. So just take a moment to be aware of where east is. I asked a question about it earlier, and everybody pointed in a certain direction. So just somebody point that way and everybody be oriented towards it. So we'll build our grid with that orientation. And if I ask you in your imagination to orient yourself towards the east, you can turn your body that way a little bit if you like, or you can just imagine that you're facing that way. But always remember where the east is. So again, if you're doing the practice inwardly, you can imagine a large square space with high ceilings. The space that you are in right now is rectangular. It does just as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be an absolute square. So we've already determined where the east is. And if you're doing it inwardly and you don't know the orientation, what you try to do is you try to feel the direction of the source. That's a kind of inner sense experience.
I have it like that.
Yeah, like that. Coming out to the showing is east.
North is there, like
Yeah.
really there, and east is there.
Okay, so
But
You
it's
you
logical
can
because
see
the
the
sea,
sun is coming there
sea
and
is
in the
there,
morning
sea in
it's
the
and the
the
river
water.
is there, so it's logical. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the sun is a representation of source in this practice. So if you don't know the orientation that you're in, just face the direction that feels like it's towards the source and build the grid from there. If you're still unsure, you can ask an inner teacher or a guide to show you which direction should represent the direction of source. And if you're using the practice in a physical space, use a compass. If the space is not aligned with the compass, you can use other points of reference. For example, the wall that mostly faces the east. Luckily, the wall in question in the room that you are in directly faces east. The position of sunrise on either the solstices or the equinoxes can also help determine where the east is, as well as the position of sunrise on your birthday. So these are different ways to orient yourself. The important thing is that when you're doing the practice, just be consistent about how you're orienting it in any physical space. If you're orienting it in your inner space, as I mentioned, it doesn't matter. You just need to face the direction that feels like source and call that the east. So, as I mentioned, the east represents the source. So as we're building the grid, think of east as the direction that you're facing, even if you're not actually physically facing it. Just have your attention faced in that direction. The reason this is important is because the corners, not the walls, are where the angels are. So west represents the self, your highest self. So now you can see that east is source and west is self, in a sense, opposites of each other, or at least the lower end of a continuum and the upper end of a continuum. North represents the path of identity. This is my name for what's called the path of involution or the path of outgoing. In other words, the direction of the universe forming itself from source, but in a sense, moving away from source in order to do that. So the north represents identity. And then the south represents the path of union, which is also called evolution or the path of return, heading back towards source. So the reason that I'm pointing this out is because the particular angels are actually overlaps of these two forces. Whatever two forces is represented in their corner. This will become clear in some further slides. So source, self, identity, and union form the basis of the grid. When you're building the grid, as I mentioned, you turn yourself a little bit toward the east wall, or you imagine yourself oriented towards that wall, the one that represents source. Now, when you do this, the power angel is going to be on your left, the direction of northeast. And this represents identity plus source. In other words, power as an expression of the source's plan for us. So that's where you can see the location of the power angel between the east and the north walls. So let's take a moment, since I mentioned that we'll actually be doing the practice as I'm teaching you about it. Turn your attention to that corner, the corner that represents the northeast and the power angel. Is anyone confused? Does anyone need a moment to figure this out before we go on? Okay, so this invocation is done in the way that is most gentle, no coercion. It's the best way to interact with the devas. I request the presence of the power angel. Please come, there is need, and I am willing to learn. I'll repeat it once again, and maybe you'll want to repeat it inwardly. I request the presence of the power angel. Please come, there is need, and I am willing to learn. Some people may become aware of a presence there. And as we talked about on the first day, that presence could be in the form of energy or an image of an angel or a sense of relationship with a being of some kind. So continuing with building the grid, oops, you're still facing the east wall representing the source, and now the beauty angel is to your right, the southeast. And this represents source plus union, or beauty as an expression of oneness with source. So here's the position of the beauty angel, source plus union. And here again, there's an invocation, same form as the previous one. Your attention's now focused in this corner. And once again, I'll repeat this invocation twice, and you can repeat it inwardly. I request the presence of the beauty angel. Please come. There is need, and I'm willing to learn. I request the presence of the beauty angel. Please come. There is need, and I am willing to learn. And once again, notice if there's a feeling of some response in that corner. So now you need to imagine that you're turning around and facing the opposite direction from east. Or you can orient your body a little bit more in that direction. But be aware of the wall of the room that is exactly opposite of the one we've been focusing on. When you do that, the love angel will be on your left, the direction of the southwest. And this represents union plus self, or love as an expression of our union with others. And here's the position in the grid for the love angel, union plus self. Once again, there's an invocation, and I'll repeat it twice, and you can repeat it inwardly if you like. I request the presence of the love angel. Please come, there is need, and I am willing to learn. I request the presence of the love angel. Please come, there is need, and I am willing to learn. And once again, notice if there's any response to this request in that corner. And now, because you're still facing the west wall representing self, the truth angel will be on your right, the direction of northwest. And this represents self plus identity, or truth as an expression of our individual dharma, the truth of who we are and our path in life. So here's the position of the truth angel, representing self plus identity. And once again, there's an invocation. I'll repeat it twice as before. I request the presence of the truth angel. Please come, there is need, and I am willing to learn. I request the presence of the truth angel. Please come, there is need, and I am willing to learn. And once again, notice if there's a response. And also be aware that to some extent, for some people, and also possibly in the space itself, there may now be energies connected to these angels, and the energy of the room may have changed in some way. Just take a moment to notice what that change feels like. And finally, for this stage, I've been told always to do this practice in the order we just did it: power, beauty, love, and truth. So each angel has a mantra, and this mantra expresses the lesson you need to learn in order for the angel to work with you. So in other words, a lesson about power, a lesson about beauty, a lesson about love, and a lesson about truth. As you use this mantra, the angel may show itself to you or become more fully present. And the mantra brings you into a relationship with or a rapport with the angel. So now we're going to go around the grid and work with these mantras. So once again, focus on the corner representing the power angel. Obviously, we're going in a circle, so just keep going in that direction. The mantra of the power angel is power that does its duty without control. Power that does its duty without control. Some of you may notice a stronger presence of that angel now, or some other change in that corner or in the energy of the room. Power that does its duty without control. So turn your attention now to the next corner, the corner of the beauty angel, continuing around the circle. The mantra of the beauty angel is beauty that is not afraid to show itself. Beauty that is not afraid to show itself. And once again, notice if there's any change in your feelings about this corner or your sense of connection to a presence there. The mantra of the love angel has a short version and a long version. The long version is intended to clarify things for people. The short version is love that stands its ground. You stand your ground against an attacker or against something that goes against your principles. Because the love deva is opposite the power deva. In a sense, the love deva is standing its ground against being crushed by power. It's expressing its own power, the power of love. Now, specifically in relationships, where this is important is when there are violations of karmic law. And the primary violation of karmic law in love and in relationships is making other people responsible for our own lack of self-care. So a typical instance of this would be in a relationship where one partner does nothing and practically enslaves the other partner to do all of the things that that person should do in terms of care of self or care of family or care of the space where they live and so on. Unfortunately, this is a very typical and common way for relationships to develop. It's a violation of karmic law because power and love are not in balance, and power is crushing out love, and love is trying to express itself, but power is not doing its duty without control. Power is only controlling for selfish purposes. So once again, the mantra of the love angel is love that stands its ground against violations of karmic law. Love that stands its ground against violations of karmic law. And once again, notice if there's any shift in your experience of a presence or an energy in that corner. Love that stands its ground. And then the mantra of the truth angel is truth that guides without judgment. Truth that guides without judgment. And once again, notice how the corner of that room responds to the mantra and whether there's any sense of presence there. So if you have your eyes closed, just take a moment to open them to look at the screen, which shows you the names of the angels and their mantras, the directions, and so on. And just be aware now that you are present in the midst of this grid of presences, spiritual presences. What does that feel like? And what does the energy of the room feel like? So there are a couple more steps. The next step is finding the Holy of Holies. This is a phrase that comes from Judaism, and it means the most inner, most sacred part of the temple, that in effect only the priest is allowed to enter. The most holy place, the Holy of Holies. So this is going to be the center point in this grid. You'll probably have to imagine it because not everybody in the room can be in the center of the room in terms of physical bodies. So imagine an overhead arc moving from truth to beauty, as in this illustration. So the arc is like the support of a dome. And then imagine an overhead arc from love to power, as in this illustration. Clearly, the Holy of Holies is going to be the spot where these two arcs meet. So in your inner vision of the room, you might want to imagine that you are standing or sitting, or that your chair even, this chair that you're sitting on in the physical room, is somehow present in the exact center of the space, of the grid. So once again, take a moment to notice what it feels like to be in this central place. This is your Holy of Holies, representing your intention to achieve a perfect balance of power, beauty, love, and truth within yourself. And of course, it's also an intention to manifest the mantras of power, beauty, love, and truth in your thought, in your feeling, in your speech, and in your action. So when you're finishing the practice, we're going to go on to another stage, which is calling in the Great Mother as an angel or a goddess. And the great purpose of the Great Mother is to hold the grid together. So the Great Mother will come into the center of the grid. And the reason that we're using the music is because it is a hymn, a Sanskrit hymn to the Great Mother. The reason that you do this is it helps hold the grid together until the next time you do the practice. So I'm going to leave up this screen if you ever need to refer back to it to remember where the angels are located and to feel more deeply into your experience of being in this sacred space that we're creating with the angel grid. You can open your eyes and do it. But for now, just take a moment to notice the feeling of the energy in the room. If you like, you can invoke the Great Mother angel in the same way that we invoke the other angels. I request the presence of the Great Mother angel. Please come. There is need, and I'm willing to learn. I request the presence of the Great Mother angel. Please come. There is need, and I'm willing to learn. And let's have the music now. The music is about 8 minutes long. Take a moment to feel the energy of the room. So we just created a sacred space. I'd welcome any questions and comments. I have a few more slides to show, but I think it would be good to talk a bit before I do that when you're ready.
As someone who had just popped in and don't know what's going on, I feel that the room is very still and it feels that the energy is pink and golden. So yeah,
Those are the colors that I associate with unity consciousness, pink, and with cosmic wisdom, which is gold. So let's conclude this practice by thanking the great Mother Angel with some deep, heartfelt gratitude. And say goodbye for now to all the angels. This is a practice that you can do once a week or once or twice a month, and you'll note that it changes each time you do it. If you want to go a little deeper, there are some ideas for advanced practice. You can invoke the angels, use the mantras, and then ask the angels for guidance, one at a time, going around the circle. Power, beauty, love, and truth. These are two simple, open-ended questions that can be very powerful to use whenever you're communicating with or collaborating with spiritual beings. What do I need to know right now? Oops, I misspelled right. What do I need to know right now? And what do I need to do with what I know? So one question at a time. The idea is to be open to any kind of suggestion from the angel of power or beauty or love or truth. What do you need to know about your relationship with power or your relationship with beauty or with love or with truth? And then what do I need to do with what I know is how can I bring this into action? How can I bring it into my daily life? And then when you're finished, as before, you can offer deep, heartfelt gratitude to each of the angels before you turn to the next one angel at a time, offering deep, heartfelt gratitude and then asking the same two questions of the next angel. You can look and listen for answers. Of course, I'm talking about looking inwardly because sometimes the angels don't speak in words. They communicate by changing their appearance. And you might be able to learn from watching that if you have that image capacity for receiving inner sense information. So, how does the appearance of the angels change? Do they show you images? Sometimes they can offer you a word or a phrase or a sentence or even a whole teaching. And if you don't understand what you're receiving from them, ask them for further guidance. It's good to record any messages that you get in a journal. And then when you're finished, again, offer the angels deep, heartfelt gratitude for their guidance and say goodbye for now. You might remember that I said something earlier about how when we connect with the angels, we're in connection with a higher reality, less oriented to time and space and physical form, and that there's often a joyousness that can be addictive. So it's important when you do practices with devas or angels to separate yourself, close it down, so to speak. You can always open it again with the invocation and the mantra work that we did previously. This helps you go about your day without being distracted by any feeling of the joy of higher beings. It might seem strange to actually break the connection, but the problem is that because they're not, the devas, the angels are not existing with a physical body, they don't necessarily realize the limitations that we experience in the physical body. And so we can forget to sleep or forget to eat or take care of ourselves in other ways. And obviously, this is not helpful or healthy for ourselves. We have to make the conscious decision to separate ourselves in order not to wear ourselves out with this joy. So here are some areas to explore if you wish to go farther with this practice. Lessons that you can learn from the power angel. For example, power is service. As I mentioned earlier in another session, one of the ways to think about this is always power under and never power over. Support instead of control. Or in the mantra of the power angel, duty to others as a dharma, service, selfless service to others as a duty that we owe in a sense, and could perhaps be a life purpose or a truth or a dharma for us. And then, of course, how not to control or be controlled by others. From the beauty angel, we can be beauty as the light of source shining through us and the work that we're doing in the world. I strongly believe that that's what we are deeply responding to in anything that is truly beautiful, and that is the light of the source shining through it. Not always the things that society calls beautiful or that creates sexual stimulation. Those are different kinds of beauty and not necessarily the light of the source shining through in the way that would be helpful or healthy. So also the mantra, fear that isn't afraid, the beauty that isn't afraid to show itself. That angel can teach us lessons about our fear of living our life purpose, or our shyness about bringing who we are and our work into the world, especially if we're artists. Lessons to learn from the love angel. We can learn how to express to other people love that is strong, clear, and direct. And especially we can learn how to avoid one-sided or codependent relationships. Codependent meaning two people who are so dependent on each other in such unhealthy ways that they really don't have a healthy relationship with each other or often with the rest of the world. And then we can also learn how to maintain an ideal balance between self-care and care of others. Selfless service doesn't mean don't take care of ourselves too, because if we don't take proper care of ourselves, we can't be of service to anybody else. And then there are lessons we can learn from the truth angel, such as the responsible guiding of others, or tolerance and impartiality, and especially freedom from judgment or criticism, judgment of ourselves, judgments of other people, or others' judgments of us. Now, if you want to go even farther, you can take this grid that I laid out for you in the earlier slides, and you can make it a permanent part of a sacred space, like a meditation room, for example, or an altar. As I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, you can place crystals or perhaps figurines that represent each angel in the four corners of the room. These objects can be visible or hidden. It depends on who uses the room and whether they would interfere in some way with the object or say mean-spirited things, rude things about it. So you can keep your sacred objects sacred. Think of these objects when you do the practice, and this can help the angels establish stronger links between their world and yours in all the ways that I was talking about in earlier sessions, creating links between physical reality and non-physical reality. So again, you can let the colors and shapes of these objects suggest themselves to you. There's no textbook about linking up specific colors or crystals to specific angels. You can get guidance sometimes from books about these things, but the best thing is to feel an intuitive sense that a particular object represents love or power or beauty or truth to you, and then putting it in the appropriate corner or of your altar or of the room, the meditation room, or even possibly your office. And it's important to know that there's no wrong way to do this because the angels will know which object is for them. So don't let your mind get too involved in trying to figure out which is the best one. So as I've mentioned a couple times, you can do this on a personal altar, which could be a small space, or in a dedicated meditation room where the corners of the room have these objects in them, or any other room in a house, or even in an office. But of course, in a public place or a semi-public place, such as a personal office, you may have to be discreet. One student of mine was working at a university in the human relations department, and he had an office of his own. And he's someone who always loved cartoon characters, and he has a very playful, childlike aspect, which is very endearing. So he disguised his angels of the four corners as cartoon characters of various kinds, because other people would think they were just quirky additions to his room, but he secretly knew that they were the place where the angel links were present. And he could feel every day at work that he was empowered to do his work in the best way possible as an expression of being in the exact center of power, beauty, love, and truth. So when you are able to achieve and maintain a perfect balance of power, beauty, love, and truth within yourself, you may be ready for deeper collaborative work with these angels. From their level of being, they'll support you in manifesting the highest human ideals through your thoughts, feelings, speech, and actions in the physical world. So that ends my presentation on co-creating with the angels of the four corners, co-creating a sacred space. So probably by now you have questions. Let's use the remainder of our time for that. Okay, yes. Come out to the front of the room, please.
My name is Mike. I have a question regarding you just said that in towards the west, it's the self, right? It reminds me that in astrology that the first house is towards the east. So I'm just wondering if there is like a cooperation there or correspondence.
I actually couldn't say because I'm not very familiar with astrology. Sometimes I've wondered whether the four seasons could be connected with the grid or the the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And I've come to the conclusion that the best thing is if you're going to work with these elements, that you find the one that seems to fit for you, because it might be different for every person. All I can say is that the angels told me what they were, and it was only later that I learned the basis of the grid. And it seems like such a strong statement or such a deep spiritual understanding to think of power as where identity and source come together, or love as where union and self come together. That I don't think any other correspondences are really needed. There's plenty to study and understand and be supported by in just those. Another question? Yes.
I have a question, but from the beginning to today, I had so many questions I had written, but fortunately, all the answers were answered during the lecture and today till now. And even morning, I had these questions, and you answered all of them, which I had, and it was really very interesting, and I felt it fully answered. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Very good. Well, I very much have appreciated the questions that you brought to the group because I think they helped people understand many things that I might not have thought to talk about. So thank you for coming. Anyone else? Yes.
Bring back my question from yesterday, which is, let's say you go to a different place and you don't have crystals with you. So my question is, can we use any stones or is the material important, or is the feeling alone important and any stone is fine?
You know, I never thought about it, but you could certainly make up a travel kit. Almost, Buddhists, for example, maybe also Hindus, but I know this mainly from seeing them in museums, have traveling shrines that they take with them wherever they go so that they can have a sacred space no matter where they've traveled. So I don't exactly know what that would look like, but the very basis of it could be 4 small stones, each one of a different color, that you've used in the sacred space of your own altar or home, and then just take them with you and put them wherever you're going in the 4 corners, as near as you can tell what they are. But I've also noticed that this practice works very well for people who are used to meditating because there's just enough visualization and not too much to completely internalize the practice. In other words, have it separate from any physical room. And that's why I talked in the beginning about the importance of having an orientation towards wherever the source feels when your eyes are closed in meditation. So it wouldn't necessarily be essential to have a travel kit. It can travel inwardly, and you can set it up wherever you are or orient yourself towards the 4 corners wherever you are just by having an imaginary space. So, yes. But I kind of like the idea of a travel kit, but then, somebody hears about it and the next thing you know, it's being marketed. Angels of the 4 Corners travel kit. And I don't know whether that would really work. So someone else? Yes.
Hello, Kurt. I am Jimena, and like seeing everything that we have been learning with you, I can sense in myself that I know that all of this exists. I know that all of this is present, but I notice that there is a feeling in me that I know too little about all of this dimension. So a fear comes in me of experiencing, because I feel as if I know too little. So I am a little like, I feel that I need to understand more about the evolution of all these beings in order to understand how to get deeper into this dimension, because I will love to be able to connect with all these beings, but because we have also like seen that it can be like a negative side of them, I would like to understand how this works, like how they evolve. Because you were saying that like if we see the line of evolution, there are elementals, then become nature spirits, then can be the earth spirits, then individual devas. And I'm wondering, for example, if individual devas, because they are more evolved, are they only like good, positive, light, love, or could be like the question is about the evolution of these beings and how this works with being in, because if we think that we're more evolved, I think there's more truth in the being. So if there's truth, there's no ignorance, so the being knows itself, and in that way the being is love, is light, is beauty, is power, true power. But if there's less evolution, that being has less awareness of the truth of itself. So that is when, for my perception, because of ignorance of that being also, there could be like an evil, but it's because of ignorance. This is my way of understanding it, but I don't know if I'm understanding okay. And I would like to learn more about this in order to be able to like explore this and be able to open to this dimension without feeling this fear of not knowing, because this fear is being a barrier, because I have heard that there's a negative side of these elementaries, and so I would like to understand this better. What would be like your advice for me to like transcend this barrier?
So I'm doing a workshop for the Theosophical Society in America in April that is just on the subject of negative entities. And it's a Zoom and also a local workshop. It's just for an afternoon, 4 hours or so, but it might answer some of your questions. It's the sort of thing that you can sign up for, but you don't have to actually attend in person. And then for a few weeks, 2 weeks after the workshop, you have the potential to look at it as often as you wish. If you want to do some reading about these things, there's a wonderful essay by Annie Besant called The Light and Dark Sides of Nature. And that is an essay that I put into an anthology of writings by Annie Besant on psychic and spiritual development that was published by the Theosophical Publishing House in America. I don't know if you'll find copies at in the bookstore at Adyar. It may be possible to order it there. It can certainly be ordered from Amazon from many different countries. I don't personally have copies that I can sell, but there's a lot of excellent information there about these questions about how it all fits together. Basically, her teaching is that there is the line of evolution. There's also the line of involution, and that if we deal with the beings that are involved with involution, they are not less evolved, but they can appear to be destructive to us because creation requires not only that there be the manifestation of form, but also the destruction of form or the breaking down of form. For example, Annie Besant has a wonderful way of talking about death. She says that death is the breaking of a form to liberate the consciousness inside so that it can grow into a higher and larger or more expansive form. And so the beings that are involved with that are not necessarily less evolved or destructive, but humanity will often consider them evil because humanity is afraid of death. And so anything that breaks the physical form to release the consciousness into a higher level of being is an object of fear for human beings who cling to the form because they don't want to grow and change. So there are many, many dimensions of this question, but the primary one is thought forms. So I mentioned about how intense thinking of any kind creates a container for the thought that is a thought form, and that this container can be sent to other people. That can include sending healing thoughts on the positive side or sending destructive thoughts in the form of what's called psychic attack. So psychic attacks are something that I'll be dealing with in this workshop. But the important thing to understand there is the devas that are involved, they're less evolved devas, and you could say that they're ignorant because they don't really know the quality of the energy that they're carrying. They just carry it because that's their function. There are, well, it's such a large question. I can't answer it in a few minutes, but you have the right attitude, which is learn more, find out more. And one thing that I'll say is I recently learned that there are thought form devas that can be really strong if somebody is a powerful spiritual person and is thinking very hard about harming someone. And I've actually seen, I call them curse devas because, I mean, I use the word deva. They're part of the deva evolution, but they're not the higher part. But they are actually thought forms. I've seen them in the form of crows. And so because they're black like crows, it's obvious to see that they come from a darker side of things. And they attack, and they can be very distracting and destructive. And so when people talk about the evil eye, or when they talk about curses, or even dark magic, there is something there. In order to protect ourselves from that kind of thing, the more we work with light, the more we have our protection, the angels of the four corners, for example, the less likely we are to have those negative experiences. Essentially, if you're under the protection of a higher deva, the only negative influence that can come through will be drawn to you because there's a weakness of some kind in your spiritual immune system. And in that sense, what they do is valid and valuable because you learn how to deal with it in terms of your spiritual immune system. But having this protection of the higher devas essentially means that you can't use spiritual powers to get power over people. Because if you do, the angels abandon you, and then you start drawing to yourself the negative influences of devas who are drawn to this kind of power that is controlling in some way. And you'll be tested. And, it's again the lesson of developing a spiritual immune system. So it's a huge, huge subject. All I can say is it's a good quest to be on. There's another form of fear, though, that needs to be talked about, and that is the fear of becoming too strange. When you start to develop along these lines, people will be afraid or won't believe you, or they might think of you as a witch or a sorcerer. You have to be careful about who you talk to about these things. And you have to make sure that you are, I want to get this right. You have to be sure that you know that you're loved, and loved not only by the physical beings around you, but also by the non-physical beings. When you have that knowledge, there's no fear anywhere. And if you're expressing and radiating love, maybe the only fear you have to worry about is whether you're doing so much of it that it drains you, because people can become overwhelmed by the needs of other beings. And so some boundaries need to be developed. But with respect to negative entities, as Leadbeater said in one of his writings, I can't tell you which one, if you're constantly pouring love into the world through yourself, that's a force that actually pushes them away. And with respect to the fear of becoming too strange, I really think that's the fear of the unknown. The very basis of the fear of the unknown is the fear of becoming unlovable. And at some very, very deep level, we think of ourselves as members of a tribe, even if we don't know who that tribe is. And so the greatest fear is to be pushed out of the tribe. And so fear of the unknown, in the sense of developing any kind of spiritual or psychic abilities, is often fear of being pushed out. And there will be people who will do that. And there will also be spiritual teachers who create tribes and then manipulate the people who join, as a cult leader does. And it's all because of the desire to belong and the fear of being pushed out. So it's very important to have groups of people who share your beliefs and values, such as you might find within the Theosophical Society or in this group of young Theosophists, as a basis of safety for exploring these things more deeply, and also as a way of getting resources, because somebody's read a book you haven't heard of that could be helpful for you in these kinds of explorations. The works of Jeffrey Hodson are really good. He's a theosophical clairvoyant. So he has a couple books about the fairy realm and some about the higher devas, and illustrations of them. That's a very good place to start within the theosophical tradition to learn more. So thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Leo.
Thank you, Kurt, for what you have just mentioned. You said that we attract negative energies or so-called negative devas because of our weaknesses in terms of our spiritual journey. So it reminds me a story of Annie Besant, who once met an entity who faked to be the master. So because we don't have that kind of like high level of clairvoyance to see what is what, so that's why it's very difficult to tell what we are attracting. Are they good energies or bad energies? So is it right to say that before we actually want to do so, it's more important for us to correct ourselves, like to develop virtues within ourselves, so-called self-mastery. So it will be safer for us to practice this kind of work.
So Annie Besant has some good advice along these lines. One of them is, if anything, any non-physical being tells you makes you excited or afraid, obviously that's not a helpful entity. If the information comes from a higher being and you feel calm, then you can know that it's from a higher being. But the excitement comes from some kind of vanity, because a being has come and has said, oh, I have a job for you. You need to save the world. And you get excited because that seems like a meaningful purpose in life. But it could destroy you to try to save the world. There's too much saving to be done. And how would you actually do it? And the ego starts to get activated, and grandiose thoughts can develop from that. And so, again, Annie Besant's way of differentiating it was, if you get excited, that's not a safe place to go. If it feels like there's an offering and you can consider it and you're allowed to do what you wish with it, there's no coercion involved, there's some support and maybe a suggestion, and it comes with a kind of impersonality, then it usually can be said to come from a higher level of being. But she also said that with respect to clairvoyance, there's no safety at all in trying to develop clairvoyance on its own. Literally, she said that there's no safety at all in doing that. The only safe way to do it is to use every power you already have in service. And then, as you're demonstrating that you can do that and maintain your own inner balance, the area of service will open and new powers will develop to support you in that. And the way that I think about it is service in small things. So if devas are present everywhere, they might be in the things that we own. Are we taking the best possible care of the things that we own? I'm not talking about obsessiveness. I'm talking about dusting or avoiding clutter, keeping a place clean. When we do these things, the devas are attracted. And it's one of the ways that we show our respect and gratitude for them. But you can move on to service to the vegetable kingdom, plants, house plants, or a garden. You can go beyond that to being of service to animals, pets, or animals that are suffering and need healing in volunteer work. At each of these levels of being, spiritual powers can develop for you so that you can know what needs to be done. Generally, any call to service will have as its basis a need of some kind. And so if you're constantly spiritually or psychically aware of the needfulness of other beings, many, many things can develop within you to help you know telepathically or empathically. And then, because you're always doing this in service, you always have the inner support and the organic development. It's when you want to speed it up that there are problems. Again, the issue of excitement. So, for example, there was a book that came out some years ago called Out of Body Experiences or Astral Projection in 90 Days. Well, that's not going to be an organic form of development. And it's very likely that the person that offers that kind of teaching is already a dark magician of some kind, and coming under that person's influence is going to be problematic. So there always needs to be an organic development, and we can ask for that. So with reference to the earlier question, the fear about working with these beings, you can always say, I'm open for any work that you want me to do, but please never let it be so much that it causes an imbalance in any area in my life, which would mean physical imbalance, emotional, family imbalance, mental, spiritual imbalance, never more than I can actually integrate in real time. Because I personally believe that one of the bases of trauma, and there is not just physical trauma, but also emotional, mental, and spiritual trauma, is too much information coming in faster than we can actually integrate it or process it in real time. And if we're trying to rush things, then our spiritual growth will be an invitation for too much to come in, and that creates trauma. But if we're just watching and waiting and letting things organically develop, that's different. Then we're never traumatized by the experience. But we can also always ask the beings that are working with us in any way, never too much. The question of karma can also be involved there, because if we have karma to work out, it doesn't have to be in some kind of huge drama that drops on us and nearly crushes us. In that case, also, we can ask that it unfolds in a way that we can deal with it organically in real time. So I hope that helps a little bit. It wasn't the most focused answer to your question. I'm afraid I'm losing it a little bit because of a need for sleep, but thank you.
I think it's excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'll take this last question here. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wonder, how is it possible to balance power and love within us, or truth and beauty? You've mentioned the mantras around. Any steps where we can read and understand and develop our own thought process to balance these forces within us?
Meditation on those mantras is the best way to do it, because no one thinks about power as duty. No one thinks about power as dharma. No one thinks about power as anything but control. And we see that everywhere in the world. So how to be a kind of power that isn't control, that could take a whole lifetime to work through or to think about. The same thing can be true. Beauty as the light of source shining through. You know, we have all kinds of ways of thinking about beauty that aren't that. But when we see that beauty, that's the light of source shining through, it's deeply, deeply meaningful. And often we'll experience tears that I call tears of truth, because they let us know that in that moment we're experiencing something that is truly deep, authentic, and true. Those tears of truth can lead us all kinds of interesting places if we follow them. So in a way, you're asking the question, can I have all the lessons in the Angels of the Four Corners kit along with the stones?
Yeah.
And, you know, you can't do it that way. It has to be a learning process. But it is an interesting beginning point, even if you don't want to do the practice with respect to the angels, just to consider those mantras as teachings. You know, if you're in any situation where you need to guide people, you'll be dealing with truth that guides without judgment. What does that mean? How can you do that? You know, the Theosophical Society has many, many wonderful teachings, but it also, some people within it are very proud of those teachings and feel that people have to deserve them before they should have access to them. I don't think that's a helpful or healthy relationship with truth, because it's truth that guides, but with judgment, and decides who it's going to guide. So I think it's important for us as Theosophists to learn that lesson of truth that guides without judgment. And of course, it's not the kind of truth that you can force someone to accept, because then you're violating the power angel. So there are a lot of ways in which those mantras can teach you, even if you don't necessarily do the practice in its entirety. Just meditating on one of them for a week and rotating through them for a month could be a whole textbook in spiritual growth.